Hello and welcome to everyone on the line. We're so glad you could join us for today's webinar, The Power of Circularity, Introducing Accelerating Circularity Group. This event was organized by the United States Fashion Industry Association, representing brands, retailers, importers, and wholesalers based in the U.S. and doing business globally, as well as our friends at Lensing. My name is Shannon Brady, Communications Coordinator at USFIA. Please note that questions can be submitted at any time during the live program. Simply click on the question header on your webinar control panel, type your text into the box, and hit send. Our presenters will address as many questions as possible at the end of the program. If for some reason we experience a technical difficulty and lose audio, please refer to the chat box for further instructions. As a reminder, all registered participants will receive an email later today with a copy of the slide deck and a recording of today's program. I'd now like to take a moment to introduce our presenters for the day. Our panelists are Tricia Carey, Director of Global Business Development for Apparel at Lensing. Tricia, would you like to say a few words and introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. Thanks for the collaboration that we have on the webinar series. It's great that we're able to continue this conversation. I know with so many things happening in the world right now, but it kind of gives us, some direction when we can continue to talk about our work and what is happening in the world. For those of you who don't know about Lensing, we're a $2.2 billion wood-based cellulosic fiber producer. We do have 7 manufacturing facilities globally. We do produce a tensile lyocell here in the United States in Mobile, Alabama. And we make viscose, modal, and lyocell, which we market as Lensing EcoVero NS Tencel. So I'm happy to be a part of the conversation today and how we're utilizing technology and circularity for the next generation.
Thanks, Tricia. We also have Alice Hartley, Senior Manager of Sustainable Innovation at Gap Inc. Alice, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you for having me. Also really happy to be here. Feels like webinars are going to be our future for the near term, so really glad to be able to share this project through this forum. For those who don't know, Gap Inc. is a portfolio company including Gap, Banana Republic, and Old Navy, but also some smaller brands, Athleta, Hill City, Intermix, and then Janie and Jack. So we are a global retailer and brand. And then my role in sustainable innovation is to pilot projects that help our company and our industry move towards more sustainable practices. So we're really excited to have gotten involved with accelerating circularity.
Thanks, Alice. And on the line with us, we also have Carla Magruder, CEO of Fabricology. Carla, would you like to say a few words?
Yes, thank you. I'm also really glad to be here, and I am really grateful for the partnership for everyone who is on the phone and participating in this project, because it's going to take all of us in the textile industry to accelerate circularity. And so I have a consulting company called Fabricology. We have started accelerating circularity as a project. And you'll learn a little bit more about the partnerships that we've forged and the importance of those to actually making change in the industry and the power that that's going to have. Thank you.
Thanks, Carla. And we also have our moderator today, Julia Hughes, President of USFIA. And Julie, I am going to hand the floor over to you to introduce yourself and kick us off.
Great. Thanks, Shannon. And next slide. So first, I want to say thanks so much to everyone who's joining us today. This is such an important topic. And for those of you who know USFIA, our motto, our slogan is fashion made possible by global trade. A lot of what we do is focused on trade policy and regulatory issues and other issues of the day, like how companies are dealing with COVID-19 today. But we also want to take a look at, what's the future for the industry? And I'm so pleased that we are able to participate with Accelerating Circularity, and also that we have this webinar to kind of start the conversation going on how can we engage on circularity? What are some of the challenges? Who has the power to make it happen? Some of the technical discussions, and then some progress. So we're going to run through a lot of information today, but I think this is so important as we look to the future. I also just want to say that while it's sometimes difficult perhaps to be teleworking, webinar is working very well for us. So we have presenters from Italy, from the East Coast and the West Coast of the US who are all participating here today. So thanks again for joining us, and let's get started. I'm going to turn over to Carla to just run through a little bit of the background of why are we so focused on circularity. So next slide.
Great, thank you, Julie. So we put this background up here because it gives us a pretty solid basis for why accelerating circularity came into being. US EPA numbers show that there's about 17 million tons of textile waste generated in the United States alone, and less than 1% of that is actually recycled into new raw material. In the European Union, those numbers are, there's about 5.8 million metric tons of textiles per year that consumers discard. China, the numbers get exponentially larger. Obviously, they also have a larger population. So accelerating circularity was developed with the idea that we would research. We're going to be researching waste, where it is, how does it get collected, how does it get sorted, how do we convert that waste into a usable material for recycling technologies, and then what are the brands and retailers' needs are. We really need to map what the supply chain, what a circular supply chain would look like compared to what it looks like today. As Julie said, how do we get to the future? And what we know is going to happen, because we've done some basic research already, is we see that there are missing links. Waste collection happens today in the marketplace, obviously not enough if you look at these numbers, but there are links that are missing that are going to take that to the collectors or to the sorters that are going to get it into a recycling technology. Once we map that out, look at what those links are that are necessary, our intention is that we will also run pilots. We're going to confirm that our supply chains work, and then that'll be reported out. Accelerating Circularity has been set up as a nonprofit organization, and the goal really is to allow the industry, to provide the industry with the knowledge that's going to accelerate circularity. So it is done for the public good. We are very specific in the fibers that we're going to be working with. We're looking at polyester, cotton, and cellulosic, such as viscose, lyocell, modal. The reason being is that when we look at those fibers, they're over 80% of fibers that are used in the market today. When it comes to waste, we're looking at it specific to a region, initially on the East Coast of the United States, because it is a very dense population, and waste is local, so we have to be able to address that when we're learning about circular supply chains. Recycling technologies, on the other hand, we're going to be looking at those from a global perspective, because those technologies in many cases will be licensed to different areas, so we really want to know what are all of the technologies that are out there. And then when it comes to supply chains, we're going to be looking carefully at the East Coast, but we will open it up to the Western Hemisphere, because it's important for us to know that we're looking at scalable, viable supply chains. So if you change the slide, move to the next slide. So the other thing that we, oh, no, I'm sorry.
Go back.
Yep, there we go. So the idea, right, behind the circular supply chains is that they're going to design out waste and reduce the need for virgin raw materials. And to do that, we're looking specifically at two different kinds of recycling: mechanical recycling, which exists today, but it needs to scale. It's relatively small quantities, and we'll talk a little bit more about what are some of the things that need to happen for mechanical recycling to scale. And then the second opportunity is chemical recycling, and there's chemical recycling today. And this is going to offer this is for a lot of people what they believe is going to be the holy grail, because you're going to be able to recycle low quality and mixed blended fabric in some occasions. So if you can move along, next slide.
Oh yeah, so thanks, Carla. Actually, go back to the slide, Shannon. Thanks, Carla. I want to kind of bring in Tricia and Alice. So Tricia, looking at the background as we're talking about circular supply chains, can you maybe share a little bit with the audience about why this is so important as a fabric producer to Lenzing?
Yes, around circularity, I think when we look at the bigger picture of the increase in consumption and, the disposal, as Carla has highlighted in some of the numbers, for Lenzing, right now we use a renewable raw material using wood as a resource, and we have the technology and the capability to use a textile-to-textile recycling process, which we call our refibra technology. So it's important for us to be involved in the circularity because we realize that's the direction of the market. We also see it as a way that we, as a responsible company that supports innovation, technology, and sustainability, that it's a way that we can lower our impacts if we can address and bring textiles back into the supply chain. So we realize that the future, this is the way that we're going, and ultimately consumers will become our raw material suppliers. And so the work of accelerating circularity is very important because it helps us, as Carla said, there's these missing links in the supply chain. And for years, we've been operating in a linear model and everything went away wherever away was. And now we have to really look at, how we can connect the collectors, the sorters, and make sure that we have the right information about that textile in order to bring it back into the supply chain.
Thanks, Tricia. And Alice, maybe then let's look at the other end of the supply chain. So from a retailer perspective and for Gap, why is the circular supply chain so important for you?
Yeah, I'd say for us, it's about long-term thinking and thinking about our long-term success as a business. We're a 50-year-old company, and if we want to be here and be successful, not only surviving, but really thriving and being a healthy company for another 50 years, we have to start thinking about the long-term time horizon. And that really leads us to think about sustainability and fiber security and where do we expect that materials are going to come from in the future. And that's why I'm excited about this project, is that it gives us a window to look at these fibers that are currently in the waste stream, not as a waste, but really as a resource. If we can just get them back and figure out ways to substitute them for producing new virgin materials and all of the resources that go into that. So I'll just add to that it's there's 3 brands that are involved in this project. In addition to Gap Inc., VF, the parent company, and Target are also anchoring this project. And we felt it was important for these large brands to step forward and say that we feel this is important and want to lead this change, and also that we have a diversity of products represented across our 3 brands.
Thanks, that's great. Let's go to the next slide, and we're going to start talking about challenges. Let me turn it over to Carla to kind of tee this up and talk a bit about, the overview here of the many challenges that face us.
I think when you talk about challenges, Tricia touched on the point of having the whole supply chain connected to one another. And I think that we typically in the textile supply chain think about those areas. We think about fiber through, yarn spinning, fabric manufacturing, dyeing and finishing, making a garment, then to consumer. But now we have to bring in parts of the supply chain that weren't typically connected to us. And so those are the challenges, right? How do we identify those areas? How do we make sure that they get connected? For instance, if we're talking about mechanical recycling, today, most mechanical recycling, they're using post-industrial goods. So they know where the goods come from, they're clean, and they're colored already. And so that provides some sort of, a good recycled product for those whose, it can meet their quality standards. But if mechanical recycling wants to move to post-consumer materials, then different things have to happen because that material now has to be sanitized. Well, where is the supply chain link to sanitize post-consumer textiles so that it can then go into a mechanical recycled product? So these are the kinds of connections that need to happen that really don't exist today. So we have to look outside of the typical textile supply chain and be aware that challenges are going to come from potentially different directions.
Thanks, Carla. That kind of leads, I think, right into asking Alice to talk a little bit about, okay, from the retail perspective and, post-consumer often, what do you need? What do you feel retailers and brands need to make circularity happen?
Well, let's start by saying I think we have a really important role to play in the design stage of the product. So we've got the ability to start designing for circularity, and once we understand what that means, what those specifications look like in order for us to design products so that it's readily recyclable, we can definitely do that and begin educating our teams on how to design to that future reality. But I'd say a big challenge there is that it's a moving target today. We're involved in a project, for example, with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation called the Jeans Redesign, and there's the ability to recycle that fabric has been defined as 98% cellulosic material, maximum 2% synthetics, and that's a working definition for today. But we hope that these recycling technologies are going to be evolving quite quickly over the next few years, so that definition may be changing. So for us, I think that's one of the challenges, is that we want to address the current reality, but also stay open to the future, and and then take that direction back into our design stage of our production.
Thanks, Alice. And Tricia, so from the lensing perspective, what do you feel that you need from looking at these challenges?
Yes, from Lensing's perspective, because we launched Tencel Lyocell with Refiber technology in 2017, I think we see these challenges evolving. And since that time in the US, we've been very involved in working with the retailers and brands. But I would put the challenges in 3 points. One, on education. And here it's education not only, like Alice mentioned, of designing into circularity, but it's also the education of common terms and definitions, which is a part of the role of accelerating circularity. There's also a need for education on textile recycling at a consumer level, the ease of making recycling of textiles, making it as common as paper, glass, and plastic, and how we can bring that into the whole cycle. There's also the need for brands to commit to circularity in order to really scale many of the technologies behind it. So I find, my work with brands, everyone says, oh, it's great, we want to do it. But until there's the commitment within the organization of a retailer or brand, I think they struggle in order to fit it into their design process, to fit it into their goals and strategies. So there definitely needs to be the commitment. And third, I would say another challenge we see is that there needs to be legislation. There needs to be that the government, just like we see with single-use plastic, like now we have the ban on plastic bags in New York, we need to have more legislation behind circularity, and this will promote the change. And this legislation could be, like we have for single-use plastic bags, to eliminate. It could also be incentives on a tax basis for importing products that address circularity. So these are some of the challenges that I see.
Thanks, that's great. Let's go to the next slide. I love this slide, and I'm hoping that Carla can kind of walk us through this, because I think it's a terrific way to look at it.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, this slide is fun because, of course we had to put it in a circle so that we could illustrate, what we want a circular supply chain to look like. And, you know, if you look at each of the pies of the supply chain, you can see that it starts at the top with resale and reuse. We put that there because that obviously is part of the circular supply chain. It isn't part that accelerating circularity will address because there are other people that are out there doing it. We're going to address from waste collectors through textile sorters, shredders, chemical innovators, mechanical innovators, and we're, you know, working right into the traditional supply chain. One of the things that we think is exciting about the potential to accelerate circularity, if we can start connecting the waste collectors, the sorters, the people who can do the feedstock conversions, you know, those post-consumer and post-industrial materials to get them prepped for the chemical and mechanical recyclers, they can go right into the existing supply chain, what you see there in that blue bar. And if we can go into that existing supply chain, that's going to allow circularity to accelerate at scale. And that's really what we need to have happen. I mean, there is exciting things that are being done with new fibers, but those things are going to take a long time. And for us to move towards more sustainable products, I think at Accelerating Circularity, we are really behind the idea of trying to find ways to make it scale. And so the idea is that if we use these technologies and we are working with the fibers that are the majority fibers in the industry, that we will be able to scale. And you can see there's also unsold garments and post-industrial waste, and those are part of today's supply chain, but they also need to be connected in a more comprehensive way so that they too can be a part of a circular system. So that's the basic premise and where we see ourselves playing.
Thanks. Alice, do you want to have any comments about the map or?
Just to emphasize that it's really an ecosystem. I think there's a lot of different players here that need to be involved. And to underline that point that you know, you can make these connections today if you really work at it, and if you in a hands-on way try to find waste and get it sorted and get it into a recycler's hands, and that is happening. But the point here is that, is it happening at scale? And how do we make these connections in a way that we're starting to actually drive marketplaces and enable those connections to be happening on their own and at a bigger scale?
Thanks. And Tricia, you want to share any thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, I like this diagram. We've been working with this for a while as an infographic to explain, you know, just how much is missing too, and how much work still needs to be done. I think also when we look at, you know, how Lensing has been working with Refibra, with there we see, you know, what dye stuffs are being used, if there are coatings on the fabrics, how do we deal with fiber separation and multi-fiber blends? You know, these are all things that need to be addressed within this circle as well. And as Carla and Alice said, you know, it's about the scaling of circularity. And so, you know, this is one thing that we've seen, that people are hesitant of how long will it take for some of this to all connect. And that's where, you know, that's something that we've been addressing, and we continue to scale and evolve our technology as well.
Thanks. Let's go to the next slide, and I think Tricia will kind of let you kick off this conversation here about some of the technical requirements to really make this happen.
Yes, so some of the technical requirements, as we've listed here, you know, there's sorting that needs to be done, and understanding what exactly waste that you're dealing with and some of the steps that are involved. The recycling technology that exists now, there's mechanical recycling, which is when you can actually take a product, take a textile, and you basically are, I kind of call it like a food processor, where you can kind of chop it up. And that means that you have shorter staples, which are then used for yarn spinning. Then there's also chemical recycling, which is what we do for our Refibra technology, where we actually take cotton waste scrap and we make that into a pulp. And by doing that, you're actually taking the cellulose back to its original form so that you can produce a product that has the same strength, aesthetics, and characteristics as an original fiber. So there you don't have any compromise on strength or hand. So for lensing, as I mentioned, in 2017, we started as the first man-made cellulosic fiber producer to commercialize the textile-to-textile recycling with our Refibra. At that time, we started off with 20% post-industrial waste. Now in 2020, we're at 30% mix of post-industrial and post-consumer cotton waste in order to make a new fiber, which we call Refibra. With this also, we're using the lyocell production process, and that's important to understand and to ask these questions of how the textile recycling is happening if you're doing any chemical recycling. We feel strongly about the lyocell production process because it is a closed loop where you have circularity built into the production process, that the solvent is being reused. So that's very important, which is different than how viscose is produced. And while it's in the solvent stage, we're able to add a fiber identification because it is also important that there is traceability behind this. And this, I think, will be another stage and another step that we'll need to address around textile recycling. So for lensing, we've actually made a commitment that our vision is to go to 50% post-consumer cotton waste, and that's by 2024. And what we've been doing is then staggering, and this comes along with, having more customers involved in utilizing the fiber and having more market awareness, really. So that's how we've been able to grow this and to increase the amount of recycled content in the fiber.
Thanks, that's terrific. Alice, do you have any comments that you might like to make about the technical requirements?
Yeah, I would add on to that by saying there's a few really interesting and compelling opportunities a step further upstream, so at the sorting stage, in order to take these used textiles and start seeing them as a resource. So one is just the physical sorting of materials into things that are good for recycling and ones that could actually be reworn and have a second life on the resale market. We're part of a project called FiberSort, which is a commercial scale piece of sorting equipment that uses an optical scanner to detect fiber type, color, and then other parameters that allow for more efficient pre-sorting. So that's one technology that I think is going to open up some doors and hopefully scale to make the sorting stage happen more efficiently. And I think it's interesting too to point out that this is where the technology and the economics really start to intersect. It's not only technological challenges that we're facing here, but how to do those at a price point where it can begin to scale and those technologies can get into the right places. And then the second thing I'll mention, also along the lines of sorting and seeing this waste as a resource, are technologies that will allow us to expand the scope of what is a good material for recycling. So we are involved in a research project with HK Rita, which is the Hong Kong Research Institute of Textiles and Apparel, that we're super excited about. Got started at the end of last year and will last for 2 years. And this research has two different objectives. One is focused on separating spandex out of fabrics that are a mix of fibers. So spandex today, by many recyclers, is almost seen as a contaminant and something that makes a fabric not really good for recycling. But if we can work out a benign way to get that spandex dissolved out of the fabric, then those fibers become useful again. So that is one prong of that research. And then the other is focused on decolorizing denim, so extracting the indigo dye out of the cotton fabric as you usually find it in denim. And that's important because then by being able to physically extract that dye, that cotton then becomes more readily recyclable and something that is, more easily seen as something that you can recycle versus something that is problematic because it's got this indigo dye in it.
Thanks, that's great. Carla, do you want to add anything else to technical?
Actually, it's really entertaining and I think really great. And the reason that we're collaborating with people like Lenzing and Gap is because they bring so much to the table. And obviously are quite knowledgeable on these things. The only thing that I would add to this is that it's, I think most of us like to think about the recyclers and what they're doing, the work of Lenzing, the work of an HK Rita. I think that Alex's point about the FiberSort project, where we're moving from FiberSort is moving from, hand sorting to mechanical sorting, which is going to allow this to be more financially, economically viable, because that's certainly something that when we're talking about creating circular supply chains, the economics of it are very important. One thing that Tricia just touched on that I thought I would focus on a little bit is the idea behind traceability. Certainly we're going to want to know if we can trace a fiber or trace a garment and know what fibers are in it. That will support the mechanical sorting. So there's even technologies that are all about traceability that are going to make the circular supply chain possible. They're going to augment the ability to do that. So.
Thanks, and that flows right into, let's go to the next slide. So let's kind of shift gears and talk a little bit about progress. I'm going to kick it back to you, Alice, to share some, sorry?
Did we miss a slide?
I don't think so. What are you looking for?
Okay.
So let's talk about progress. Alice, would you like to share some thoughts here?
Yeah, I'd say some points of progress that we've been able to make and happy to share are beginning to incorporate recycled materials into our finished products. So we started that looking at denim, which is a huge category for our brands, and we started small. The goal there was to prove that it was possible and then be able to scale it across a number of different fabric mills that we work with, and then several different brands. So we started with product that was launched at the end of 2019 that had minimum 5% post-consumer recycled cotton in our denim. So that was at Gap, Old Navy, Athleta, and then our Banana Republic factory business. And like I said, it started small. So 3 mills were who we worked with at first, and who were able to source post-consumer recycled fiber and work out some of the hitches that came up and turning that into yarn and turning that into fabric. But then we've been able to scale it from there. So while 5% might sound like just a baby step at first, those numbers really start to add up when you begin to do it at scale. So just in that first season, it was 91,000 pounds of recycled cotton that we were then able to pull into the product. And I think that pull mechanism is what's important, and starting to show that there's a demand there, and that we can do it in some of our biggest product lines starts to pave the way for other mills to follow suit. We've also begun to use some Refibra in our Banana Republic men's denim, and demonstrate that it's adding to the product there.
Thanks. That leads right to Tricia. Do you want to have any comments about progress that we're seeing today?
Yeah, the progress. I think, and as Alice had mentioned, many brands that we see are starting some smaller programs. They're also testing how they communicate to the consumer around circularity. Lenzing's been very involved in partnering with brands in order to support that communication, because it's a little different. And how do you address waste doesn't have to be a bad thing. People don't have to view that as something that was no longer usable. And so how do we bring that in? So besides the jeans that are here from Banana Republic that are using Refibra, which can be purchased at this time online, you can search by Refibra on Banana Republic. We've worked with several other partners, and I would say, there's also at Closed, which is a brand in Germany, Country Road, Eileen Fisher, Guess, Kings of Indigo, Levi's, Mara Hoffman, Patagonia, Reformation. These are some of the brands, and they've been partners with us since 2017 when we launched Refibra, many of them, and continue to have collections with Refibra. So I think this is where we find it very important with the progress progress is to have strong brand partners, and this will bring us to our vision of having 50% post-consumer by 2024. So, and I think what's wonderful about our industry is that every season we have a chance to make a difference and to make that small change. And this is what we need in order to bring textile to textile circularity to a scalable level.
Thanks, Tricia. Carla, would you like to say a few words also about what you're seeing in terms of progress today?
From my perspective, because I'm looking at, how do we build the information and provide that to the industry? That's what Accelerating Circularity's goal is. And the progress that we're making on that is the number of people that have contacted us who want to participate in this, who would like to get information. There's a tremendous need for information out there. So our goal is to be able to create knowledge so that we can collect these links. We're in the process of running a variety of surveys. On our surveys for our recycling technologies, we have identified over 60 different recycling technologies that are out there. Obviously, Refibra, Alice mentioned HK Rita. They have actually multiple different technologies. So there is progress just in the direction that the industry is moving, and I think that's an exciting place for us to be in today.
Thanks. Let's move to the next slide, which is the last slide, and just kind of, I think, go back to you, Carla, with a bit about the big picture here of how talking about accelerating circularity fits into the SDGs. And obviously, as we're looking at, surveys and gathering more information from the industry.
With what's going on in the world today, I think we all find ourselves in quite an unusual situation. I think one that a month ago nobody would have expected. However, we've known that the SDGs are something that it's incredibly important for the industry and for our world and our communities. And I think that the textile industry, especially SDG 12, is a perfect target for us, which is responsible consumption and production. So if we can produce things in a responsible manner, and obviously, this icon shows things basically in a circular supply chain or a never-ending supply chain. That's ideally where we would like to see the industry. We'd like to see the elimination of textile waste in landfills, and we'd like to see the reduction of virgin fibers. And if we do that, we believe that we can move the industry to a better place, and that will help support not only our industry, but the community and our environment altogether. And so to do that, at acceleratingcircularity.org, you can go to that website, and there is a tab that talks about surveys. And on those surveys, there's surveys for a variety of different market steps, because we're going to need information from everyone. So we would like people to go in and to fill out those surveys. That would be incredibly helpful. It's going to take all of us to create the supply chains, our existing supply chains. They're incredibly complicated. I think that these new supply chains aren't going to be any less complicated. So it's going to take all of us to help put those together and create the knowledge so that the entire industry can use it, so that we can scale these systems.
Thanks, Carla. Alice, do you have some final words?
Yeah, I'd say just in conclusion that why we're doing this is that we no longer have the luxury of trying to solve our problems one at a time. What we really need are these solutions that go after two problems at once, or two or more, I would say. So in this case, I keep going back to the waste problem and breaking it down to the scale of a household. So a single person is responsible for around 80 pounds of textile waste every year. going either into landfill or incineration. So that's one end of the problem. And the greenhouse gases that are produced as that material, breaks down in a landfill. And by closing the loop, we're not only solving that problem, but we're tying it to the problem of resources going into virgin materials. So if we can address those two things at once and really make it more of a double whammy, then I think that's what's exciting here about this project and closing the loop in general.
Thanks. And Tricia.
Yeah, I would just like to add to this. It's all about collaboration, and certainly we see at the times right now and globally how we're interconnected. So I think not only when we look at SDG 12, responsible consumption and production, but there's also SDG 6, which is relating then to water, and looking at SDG 15, which is life on land. These are all ways that just by looking at textile to textile recycling, we can also impact other SDGs. But this is where we need the collaboration. And for Lenzing, since we're at the very beginning of the raw material chain, as a fiber producer, this is where we do find that we need everyone together. And that's why I feel it's very important with accelerating circularity, the group of people that are together, the information that we're asking for the industry to collaborate on is very important right now.
Thanks so much. Thanks to all of you for being leaders in this effort. It's so important as we are going forward for us to continue to work together as an industry. Let's go to the next slide, and I'll turn it over to Shannon, and I hope we have a lot of questions from the audience that we can talk about. Shannon.
Hi, Julie. Hi, Julie. And yes, I just want to say thank you to all of our speakers today as well. We're going to start the question and answer segment. The first question is, where does post-consumer waste go most often? Directly into municipal waste bins, or does it come bulk through clothing donating organizations like Goodwill or Oxfam?
I can jump in on that, Salis. Yeah, the majority, unfortunately, does go into landfill or incineration. There's some that gets, I guess, diverted from that ultimate fate by first taking a trip through the secondhand market, but it's the minority.
The figures of what
Thank
goes,
you.
The figures that of what goes into landfill versus what gets diverted are quite staggering. I think it's about 8%, something like that, goes through some other stream. I can probably look that up while we're talking. I have it somewhere.
Thank you, guys. And the next question, Alice, this one is for you. Alice, what are some of the hiccups around creating and utilizing post-consumer recycled material in denim?
Yeah, I'd say the first one was either the truth or just the perception about quality concerns. And that's why we started small with the 5% recycled content in our denim. We didn't know what we didn't know getting into that, and so we were assuming that there would be some concerns around strength, abrasion of the fabric, and just other sort of quality related factors that we normally test for and really need to stand behind, because the last thing we want to do is make a lesser quality product that would really defeat the purpose if it's going to be less durable because it's got recycled content in it. So we did a lot of legwork with our spinners and the mills that we were working with to test that fiber at the fiber stage, at the yarn stage, and at the fabric stage. And then in denim, what's unique is all of the different washes that we put on that fabric for aesthetic reasons, but sometimes they don't doesn't necessarily help the strength and durability of that fabric to put it through the washing process. So that was yet another place where we needed to do some extra testing and make sure that that fabric with the 5% recycled content would hold up to your typical range of denim of washes, so that we could be offering a product that we were really happy about and didn't feel like was a compromise.
And I just wanted to add to that. This is Tricia. What we found, and since we've had a textile-to-textile fiber refibra in the market for 3 years, we've also done a lot of work with yarn spinners, fabric producers, and as Alice had said, how are the nuances of the denim industry and the garment finishing process with this type of a product. And we found that in our work that there haven't been any issues, and because we're doing the because we're doing the chemical recycling, we still have the strength of the fiber there. What we've also found is that mills have been able to increase their percentage of mechanically recycled cotton by blending it with our chemically recycled refibra, because there you have a carrier fiber, so you have one stronger fiber helping out the weaker fiber. And so this has actually been very interesting that we have a couple of mill partners, one in particular, Candiani Denim in Italy, that developed a product that uses no new cotton. So they were able to engineer a mix of the mechanically recycled cotton at 50% with our refibra at 50% and create this new product, which actually even won the ITMA Innovation Award. So I think, as Alice said, it's getting it out in the market, it's testing things, but we even find that as we've brought refibra to the market, then there's even more ideas that come out of the collaborations of working with our partners.
Yeah, and one other thing I'll add, the question there was about hiccups. So, while we took this pretty cautious approach and wanted to make sure it was going to work, we learned a lot of things along the way about the parameters that we need to stick to when working with recycled materials. So, for example, fabric weight. We learned that below a certain weight, it's maybe not a good idea to use the recycled fiber because those lightweight fabrics are more vulnerable to the strength and quality concerns. So we've been keeping track of those learnings, sharing them internally, and I think that's the type of learning curve that others in the industry will need to go along as well.
Great, thank you. The next question, this audience member, they've heard a lot about some fiber separation and mechanical fiber recycling so far, but they wanted to know if you could go into a little bit more detail about the kinds of chemical innovations that have been considered to date.
This is Carla. There's a tremendous amount of different types of chemical recycling, and that depends on whether or not you're chemically recycling cellulosics, as Lensing is doing in the Refibra project, or if you're chemically recycling polyester. So there's a huge number of different kinds of recycling. The technologies run the gamut from things like hydrolysis, methanolysis, glycolysis, enzymatic solutions, different solvent solutions. So like I said, there's over 60 people that we've identified that are part of our research project. So, and each one of these have different requirements in terms of what feedstocks they can accept and how the process runs. That's a bit of a complicated question.
Great, thank you. And for the next question, this is for Tricia. So you mentioned that quality of material isn't compromised through the recycling process. How long typically is the lifespan of a lensing product?
It's really hard to say a lifespan because it depends on what the yarn is blended with, the fabric, what kind of construction it is, if there's any other treatments. So I can't really comment on that because there's so many other factors beyond just our fiber as one ingredient.
Thanks, Tricia. And the next question, does organic versus non-organic make a difference in the recycling process? Is one easier to recycle?
One of the things that, this is Carla, one of the things that I often say when we're talking about circularity is that circularity is a really important step that the industry needs to take when we're looking at sustainability. It is not the answer to all of our sustainability problems. So there are a lot of other issues there, and organic is one of them. How a fiber is originally grown or sourced is going to make a difference, as is once we recycle these fibers, what type of processing we use. Once we come up with these recycled fibers that can be circular, how they're dyed, how they're finished, how they're knit and woven are going to make a difference in terms of their overall sustainability efforts. In terms of whether or not a cotton, which is organic versus one that is not organic, Trisha, I don't know if you can answer that when it comes to Lensing using cotton.
For the rest of the team to see if we can either get some money here or.
I'll jump in. This is Alice on cotton. So while it may not interfere with the physical recycling of that fiber and make it any easier or worse, I think there's an interesting point there about the materials that we want to be circulated in the first place. So if the assumption is that these materials are not just going, on a linear journey to the landfill, but we are going to try to keep them in circulation, not just once, but possibly many times, it makes you think harder about the input materials and wanting them to be not only renewable, but safe to be recirculated. So I think whether a fiber is organic or not, in the big picture is important, while maybe not interfering like physically with the recyclability of that fiber.
Great, thank you. And for the next question, I know we talked a little bit about the chemical process of recycling earlier. So for the chemical process to recycle, has there been any studies on how that process impacts the environment?
Each company who is doing recycling technologies are looking at their environmental profile. Many of them are doing either life cycle assessments or life cycle inventories, or doing some research into how their process affects the environment. Obviously, everyone's goal is to reduce their environmental footprint, but you can't say that if something's chemically recycled, it is automatically better environmentally than something that's mechanically recycled or something that's virgin. It's on a case-by-case basis, and that's going to be something that we will be looking at and trying to highlight as we create the maps of what's available and what's out there.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that. I think, there's trade-offs with everything. It's a great question. You have to look at the amount of work that goes into the collection, the sorting, the energy, if there's fiber separation that has to happen. And that's where it's also looking at the production process of what is required to get the textile and the waste back into circulation. From our work, we've done some MSI analysis comparing our Refibra to our Tencel lyocell, and there we have shown some water and energy savings. So we have done some initial work to try to understand the environmental impacts.
Great, thank you. For our next question, when taking the dyes out of clothes, like indigo dye in jeans, what happens to those? Can you reintegrate those dyes back into new clothes, or do you have to dispose of it?
That is a good question. This research on the denim decolorization is just getting underway. So figuring out how to do that is going to be the first step. So I guess I don't have a lot of comments right now on the reusability of the indigo dye. But that would certainly be the ideal, is to either be able to work with the dyes that are already in fiber and say that this is an added benefit and not need to re-dye fiber as it's being recycled, or for fibers where the goal is to get the denim or the dye out, to be able to conserve it and reuse it.
I've spoken to some chemical recyclers who whose processes are able to separate out different chemicals within the materials that they're recycling. And so they're able to split out, things like, what are the, say it's polyester, what are the monomers, what are the different chemical elements that are in there. Whether or not, when they separate those chemicals out, whether or not they become a viable new product is going to depend on a number of things, such as the volume of product. Is it something that they can actually extract and then sell on to somebody else to use again? So those things will, again, are going to be very dependent on a specific process. We're a little bit back to what we used to say a lot, when someone asks questions about sustainability, it depends. So there's still a lot of it depends there.
Great, thank you. The next question, for those looking to start their own small business and can build the whole business around circularity from the start, but maybe don't have all the resources in the world, what resources do you recommend them to look at, and what are some first steps that you guys might recommend?
Well, this is Trisha. I would just start off by saying, you don't have to tackle everything all at once. So take some of those small steps to get started. And I think, I like to refer to circularity as small circles and big circles. And so maybe you just start with some of the smaller circularity concepts that can work with what is commercially available now. And then to have goals to continue to evolve that. But I think, connecting with our organization and looking at accelerating circularity are great steps to get started.
Thank you. And so this question is from an audience member who leads sustainability initiatives at their university. And they were curious to know your thoughts on what should be the right steps to introduce circularity to students, whether it's in terms of pilot projects, industry partnerships, curriculum. How can their university join hands with the industry and other trade associations?
Yeah, I'll start with that. It's Alice. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such a great opportunity, because so much of making circularity work is going to involve consumer awareness. And, first of all, just making people understand that when you are done with a garment, is it really done, or is that does it have a second life somewhere with a different user? The potential for it to be reworn is really the first thing that I think we have this opportunity to shift mindsets around. And then if it can't be reworn, where is it going to go? And I think universities are a great place for that type of learning and connection to happen. And also as an institution, can you organize a drive or a larger campaign to set something up where you're actually collecting textiles? I think there's lots of opportunity where people are living, close to each other to not only spread the word, but also implement some solutions that will help get those textiles out of the waste stream and into some form of a secondary life, whether that's reuse or some form of recycling.
Great, thank you. And for the sake of time, we're just going to do one more question, and this is for all of you. Is there a way that brands can get more involved in the Accelerating Circularity project?
This is Carla. The best way for brands to get involved with the Accelerating Circularity product is to go to the website and fill in the surveys. And there's actually also on the website, there is a contact us form. And if there if there's something that you feel like you would like to share with us, or information that you would like with us, if you fill that in, we'd be happy to come back and to answer you on that. But the thing that the group needs now more than anything else is to be able to gather information. So sharing information is the best way to collaborate. And I just wanted to let you know that on the recycling, it's 13.6% of textiles and apparel actually gets recycled, but that can be turned into anything from shoddy and insulation to going to Goodwill, and the rest of it goes to incineration or landfill. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you again to all of our presenters today. Before we go, I just wanted to mention that USFIA and Lensing will host one more webinar in the Sustainability, Innovation, and Collaboration series on April 15th. It is Be the Difference, Integrating the UN Sustainable Development Goals into Your Business. You can register at usfashionindustry.com. So we are going to conclude today's webinar. As a quick reminder, you will receive a follow-up email containing the slide deck and a recording from today's program. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us with any additional questions. You can always contact USFIA directly by emailing us at info@usfashionindustry.com. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to hosting you at the next USFIA event.
Thank you.
Thank you.